An airport gate becomes the stage for a global scandal. Two 10-year-old black twins are publicly denied their flight by a veteran agent, sparking a firestorm of outrage. The world cheered when their father, a titan of industry, made a single furious phone call that grounded an entire airline in retaliation. Justice seemed swift and satisfying, but the celebrated story of a father's righteous revenge was built on a calculated multi-billion-dollar lie. Prepare for the shocking, untold story of power deception and the vicious karmic twist that ultimately exposed the devastating truth. The air in the terminal at Newark Liberty International Airport hummed with the controlled chaos of 1,000 different journeys. It was the week before Christmas 2024, a time when the air itself seemed thick with a mixture of festive anticipation and frazzled nerves. For 10-year-old twins, Maya and Mia Sterling, the excitement was electric. They were on their way to visit their grandmother in London, a trip that had been the singular focus of their conversations for months. They clutched matching unicorn backpacks, their meticulously braided hair adorned with silver beads that clicked softly with every skip and hop. Their father, Marcus Sterling, had been called away on an urgent business matter in Japan, a last-minute trip that had pained him to take. He had booked their tickets with meticulous care on Global Air Alliance, one of the world's premier airlines, ensuring they were registered as unaccompanied minors, with every possible VIP service checked and paid for. He had kissed their foreheads at dawn, his deep voice a comforting rumble. "Be good for Grandma. I'll be there before you know it. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Now standing before gate B47, the twins were in the care of a designated airline chaperone, a pleasant but hurried young woman who had guided them through security. The gate area was a sea of weary travelers, a family with a crying baby, a group of students in matching university hoodies, and a businessman barking into his phone, all vied for space and power outlets. At the podium presiding over the boarding process for Flight 88 to London Heathrow was senior gate agent Brenda Walsh. Brenda was a woman who wore her authority like a second skin. With 30 years on the job, she had seen it all, or so she believed. Her face was set in a permanent mask of mild disapproval. Her blonde hair sprayed into a helmet of immobility. She ran her ship with military precision, and any deviation from her established rhythm was met with an icy glare and a clipped, non-negotiable tone. As the pre-boarding announcement for families and passengers needing extra assistance began, the chaperone led Maya and Mia forward. Maya, ever the more confident of the two, presented their boarding passes with a proud smile. "We're flying to see our grandma for Christmas," she announced to no one in particular. Brenda Walsh took the passports and boarding passes without a word. Her eyes, the color of faded denim, flickered from the documents to the girls, then back again. A small, almost imperceptible frown line deepened between her brows. She typed something into her computer, her long red nails clicking a staccato rhythm on the keyboard. The line behind the twins was growing a restless shuffle of feet and bags. "There seems to be a problem with the paperwork," Brenda said, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. The chaperone leaned in. "I don't believe so. It was all confirmed this morning. They're registered as unaccompanied minors." Brenda let out a short, sharp sigh, a sound of profound inconvenience. "The system is flagging an issue with the consent form. The signature from the mother is unverified." She held up a tablet showing a digital form. The chaperone peered at it. "But the father, Marcus Sterling, is the sole legal guardian. It's all documented in their profile. He booked the tickets himself." This was the moment the atmosphere shifted. Brenda's gaze hardened. She looked from the chaperone to the two young black girls standing before her, their bright eyes wide with a dawning confusion. Whispers began to ripple through the line. Brenda leaned into her microphone, her voice now carrying a distinct edge of performance. "Ma'am, airline policy is crystal clear, especially with international travel and the heightened risks of child trafficking." She said the last two words with a grave importance, letting them hang in the air. "We require verifiable consent from both parents. In the absence of one parent, we need notarized documentation proving sole guardianship, not just a note in a booking file." The chaperone was taken aback. "I've escorted dozens of children with this airline. I've never encountered this. Their father is a very frequent flyer. His status is top tier. Surely a note in the system. Status doesn't supersede federal regulations and company policy." Brenda snapped, her voice dripping with condescension. She looked past the chaperone directly at the twins. "I can't in good conscience allow these children to board this flight. We don't know the full situation. For their own safety, they will not be flying today." The public declaration was like a slap. For their own safety. The implication was ugly insidious. It suggested danger, a questionable background, a problem. People in the line stared openly now, some with pity, others with a flicker of suspicion. A man behind them muttered to his wife, "Probably for the best. You never know these days." Mia's lower lip began to tremble. Maya, fiercely protective, put an arm around her sister's shoulder. "But our dad said it was all okay," she said, her voice small but firm. "He's waiting for us to call when we land." Brenda ignored her. She stamped the boarding passes with a large red "denied" and pushed them back across the counter. It was an act of finality of dismissal. She had made her judgment, and in her small kingdom of Gate B47, her word was law. The chaperone flustered and out of her depth tried to argue, but Brenda had already turned away, gesturing for the next passenger in line. The humiliation was a hot, creeping flush. The whispers, the stares, the agent's cold dismissal. It all coalesced into a single, painful experience for the two little girls. They were being turned away, treated like a problem, a risk. As they were led away from the gate, the sounds of the boarding process continuing without them. The cheerful dings. The final call felt like a personal rejection. Maya was crying silently now, tears tracking paths down her dark cheeks. Maya, blinking back her own tears, held her sister's hand, her small face a mask of confusion and a hurt that went far deeper than a missed flight. They didn't understand the complex rules of air travel, but they understood the simple, brutal language of exclusion. And in that moment, they had never felt so small. The sterile, beige-walled office they were led to felt like a punishment room. It was a small, windowless space reserved for passenger incidents, smelling faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. The chaperone, a young woman named Sarah, was now frantic. She was on her phone, speaking in hushed, urgent tones to a supervisor, her earlier professional calm completely shattered. "I'm telling you, everything was in order. The system accepted the booking. This is a Diamond Medallion Centurion level member we're talking about. The agent, she just decided. No. She mentioned trafficking. Yes, out loud." Mia was curled on a hard plastic chair, her face buried in her unicorn's plush mane, her small shoulders shaking. Maya sat bolt upright, her jaw tight, a silent sentinel guarding her sister's grief. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. They had done nothing wrong. Their father had done nothing wrong. Yet here they were in a box of shame, while their plane, the magical vessel meant to carry them to their grandmother, was likely pushing back from the gate. They won't even rebook them. Sarah said into the phone, her voice cracking with disbelief. "She's put a permanent note in their file, flagging them for a family services welfare check due to incomplete guardianship documentation. This is a nightmare." Finally defeated, Sarah hung up. She looked at the girls with eyes full of pity. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "My supervisor he's not being helpful. He's backing the gate agent. He says Brenda Walsh has a perfect record." She wrung her hands. "We need to call your father." Maya nodded, her expression grim. This was the call their father had told them to make, only in a true emergency. He had given them a special number, not his regular mobile. A number that bypassed assistance and went to a device he carried at all times. Sarah dialed the number on her phone and put it on speaker. It rang only once before a voice answered, a voice that was calm, clear, and radiated an authority that made the air in the small room seem to stand still. Sterling. It wasn't the warm, rumbling daddy voice they knew. This was the voice he used in boardrooms, the one that made grown men sit up straighter. "Mr. Sterling, this is Sarah from Global Air Alliance. I'm the chaperone for Maya and Mia." She began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's been a situation. They were denied boarding for their flight to London." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound it felt heavy. "Explain," Marcus Sterling said. The single word was not a request. It was a command. Sarah stumbled through the explanation detailing Brenda Walsh's accusations, the mention of child trafficking, the unverified signature, the refusal to consider his sole guardianship status, and the permanent negative mark placed on his daughter's file. As she spoke, Maya watched the color drain from the chaperone's face, intimidated even as a third party. When she finished, the silence returned, stretching for a full 10 seconds. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice dangerously soft. "Sarah, what is your full name and employee ID number?" She gave it to him. "Thank you, Sarah. You have done your job. Now please put my daughter Maya on the phone." Sarah handed the phone to Maya. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, her own voice breaking. "Maya, my love. Are you okay? Is your sister okay?" The warmth was back, a laser focus of fatherly concern. "Mia's crying. The lady was mean, Daddy. She said we were a risk." Everyone was staring at us. A sound came through the phone, a deep, controlled exhale. It was the sound of a patient man reaching the absolute limit of his patience. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya. You have done nothing wrong. That woman made a mistake, and I am going to fix it. I want you to be brave for your sister. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, Daddy." "Good girl. Now please give the phone back to Sarah." When Sarah took the phone back, the tone had shifted again. The softness was gone, replaced by tempered steel. "Sarah," Marcus Sterling commanded, "walk out of that office and go directly to gate B47. Do not speak to your supervisor. Go to the gate agent Brenda Walsh. Put your phone on speaker and hold it up for her to hear." "Sir, she's boarding a full flight." "Do it now." Hesitantly, Sarah obeyed. She walked out of the office, the twins trailing behind her, their eyes wide. They re-emerged into the bustling terminal and walked back towards the gate. The last few passengers were shuffling through the jet bridge. Brenda Walsh was at her station, looking triumphant, the queen of her domain. "Excuse me, Brenda," Sarah said, her voice shaking. Brenda looked up, annoyed. "What now? I'm closing the flight." "Mr. Sterling would like to speak to you," Sarah said, holding out the phone. Brenda rolled her eyes in theatrical exasperation. "I have nothing to say to him. I've made my decision. It's final." She started to turn away. "You will take this call." The voice boomed from the phone, so loud and clear that several nearby passengers stopped and stared. "Or, in approximately 90 seconds, the CEO of this airline will be calling you personally to ask why you are refusing to speak to his largest private shareholder." Brenda Walsh froze. The color drained from her face. Shareholder. The words hung in the air, electric and terrifying. Slowly, as if in a trance, she reached for the phone. "This is Brenda Walsh," she said, her own voice suddenly small. "Ms. Walsh," came the voice of Marcus Sterling, as cold and unforgiving as a glacier. "You have denied boarding to my children. You have publicly accused them of being a flight risk. You have humiliated them, and you have done so based on a policy that my legal team helped this very airline draft 3 years ago. A policy that explicitly covers sole guardianship status for executive tier members. You did not check. You did not verify. You made a judgment." I was following procedure," she stammered. "No, Ms. Walsh, you were not. You were engaging in a discriminatory act. Now here is what is going to happen. Flight 88 is not leaving that gate. In fact, no Global Air Alliance flight from Newark, JFK, or LaGuardia is leaving its gate. As of now." He must have pressed a button or sent a text, because at that exact moment, a new announcement crackled over the airport's PA system. A confused voice from Central Operations. Attention all flight crews and ground staff for Global Air Alliance. We have a temporary ground stop in effect for all departing flights. All flights are to hold at the gate. Stand by for information." The terminal erupted in confused murmurs. Brenda Walsh's jaw went slack. Her eyes darted around as if looking for an escape. The other agents at the gate stared at her, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror. The voice on the phone continued relentless. "I am Marcus Sterling. I am the founder and CEO of Sterling Capital, a firm that holds a 17% stake in this airline. My daughters will be personally apologized to by you. They will be escorted back onto that plane which will wait for them. They will be placed in their first-class seats, and you will be the one to serve them their pre-departure orange juice. Once Maya sends me a text message confirming that this has happened, I will make one more call and allow this airline to resume its operations. Do you understand me, Miss Walsh?" She couldn't speak. She just nodded her blonde helmet of hair, not moving an inch. Her world, her authority, her perfect record. It had all just been dismantled in a matter of seconds by a voice on a phone from halfway around the world. The power she had wielded so carelessly had just been met with a power so immense it could ground an entire fleet. The whispers at the gate had been replaced by a stunned, gaping silence. The king had just been checked, and the entire board was frozen. The ground stop was an invisible, suffocating blanket thrown over the busiest air corridor in the United States. At Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia, the blue and silver tails of Global Air Alliance planes sat dormant at their gates. Pilots, initially annoyed, grew concerned. Flight attendants fielded questions from increasingly agitated passengers. In the Central Operations Tower, blinking red lights and frantic calls painted a picture of unprecedented chaos. An order of this magnitude, issued without warning from weather or FAA control, was unheard of. It could only come from the very top. Back at Gate B47, time seemed to warp. The confused announcement about the ground stop echoed in the silent, gaping space that had formed around Brenda Walsh. The remaining passengers, the other gate agents, even the cleaning crew, all stared at the woman, holding the phone, her face ashen. She was no longer a figure of authority. She was the epicenter of a cataclysm she couldn't comprehend. Marcus Sterling's voice came through the phone one last time, a final sharp command that cut through her paralysis. "Put my daughter Maya on the phone." Brenda, trembling, handed the phone back to the little girl. "Daddy." Maya's voice was a whisper. "It's okay now, baby girl," Marcus said, the warmth returning instantly. "That nice lady Sarah is going to walk you and your sister onto the plane. A man named Mr. Henderson, the head of the whole airport for the airline, is going to meet you at the door. I want you to give him a big smile. And the other lady, Miss Walsh, is going to bring you some juice. You text me when you're comfortable in your seat. Okay?" "Okay, Daddy." When Maya handed the phone back, Brenda simply stared at it. The call had disconnected. The invisible tether to the source of this immense power was gone, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold. As if on cue, a man in a tailored suit, his face pale and beaded with sweat, came running down the concourse. This was David Henderson, the Global Air Alliance Newark station manager. His own phone was pressed to his ear, and his eyes were full with panic. He skidded to a halt before the gate. "What in God's name did you do?" "Brenda," he hissed, his voice a choked whisper of fury. He wasn't yelling. It was worse. It was the sound of a man watching his career implode. "I just got off the phone with the CEO Richard Davenport. He was called out of a board meeting by Marcus Sterling. Do you have any idea who that is?" Brenda could only shake her head, her helmet of hair finally seeming to wilt. "He's not just a shareholder, you idiot." Henderson spat, his composure cracking. "He's the money. He's the man who personally guaranteed the loan that kept this airline out of bankruptcy last year. He basically owns us. And you just flagged his twin daughters for child trafficking." Henderson turned and saw Maya and Mia standing small and silent amidst the wreckage of his afternoon. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. The fury vanished, replaced by a frantic, almost painfully solicitous kindness. "Hello there," he said, kneeling down so he was at their eye level. His smile was wide and terrified. "My name is David. I am so terribly sorry for this misunderstanding. We are going to get you on your plane right now. Everything is going to be wonderful." He stood up and glared at Brenda. "Get them on the plane. You. Now." He then turned to Sarah, the chaperone. "You are to escort them to their seats in first class. First class, 1A and 1B. I don't care who is sitting there. Move them. The flight crew is being briefed." The walk down the jet bridge was surreal. The few remaining economy passengers who had been held back stared as the procession passed the station manager leading the way. The two small black girls, the vindicated chaperone, and at the very back, the disgraced gate agent, Brenda Walsh. On the plane, the first-class cabin was already buzzing. The purser, a man with a practiced calming smile, greeted them at the door. "Welcome aboard," he said, his eyes meeting Henderson's with a look of shared crisis. "We've been expecting you." The occupants of seats 1A and 1B, a wealthy-looking couple in their 60s, were already being politely but firmly relocated. They grumbled, but a few whispered words from the purser about a critical security matter initiated by our board silenced them immediately. Maya and Mia settled into the impossibly large leather seats. A flight attendant immediately appeared with warm towels. Another offered them noise-cancelling headphones and tablets preloaded with every movie they could imagine. The change was dizzying. Moments ago, they were pariahs. Now they were princesses. Then came the final, most exquisite act of the drama. Brenda Walsh, her face a mask of utter mortification, appeared in the first-class cabin. In her hands, she held a silver tray. On it were 2 crystal glasses filled with fresh orange juice. She walked the length of the cabin, her colleagues, the flight attendants she had shared coffee with that morning, averting their eyes. They knew. Everyone knew. She stopped at seats 1A and 1B. Her hands were shaking so badly, the glasses rattled on the tray. She leaned down, avoiding their eyes. Your orange juice, she stammered. Maya, emboldened by her father's power, looked directly at her. Thank you, she said, her voice clear and without malice. It was somehow more cutting than any insult. She took a glass. Mia took the other. Brenda stood there for a moment, trapped. There was nowhere to go. She had to wait. Maya took out the phone Sarah had been holding for her. She opened her messages to Daddy and typed a simple, powerful sentence. We have the juice now. We are okay. She pressed send. Miles away, in a high-tech office overlooking Tokyo Bay. Marcus Sterling read the message. A grim smile touched his lips. He made his second call. Richard, he said, the girls are on board. You can let your planes fly now. Less than a minute later, the captain's voice came over the intercom on Flight 88. Well, folks, it appears the mysterious ground stop has been lifted. Apologies for that unusual delay. We should be pushing back from the gate momentarily. A collective sigh of relief went through the cabin. But for Brenda Walsh, standing defeated in the aisle of first class, the nightmare was just beginning. As she turned to walk away, a single tear finally escaped and traced a path through her thick foundation. It was a tear of humiliation, of fear, and of the dawning, terrifying realization that she had picked a fight with a god, and the consequences had only just begun to rain down. The story didn't stay contained within the aluminum fuselage of Flight 88. In the age of instant connectivity, secrets have a shelf life measured in minutes. It started with a single tweet from a passenger in business class, a tech journalist named Kevin Wu, who had witnessed the entire drama unfold at the gate. At Kevin Wu reports. Unbelievable scene at Newark at Global Air. Gate agent publicly denies boarding to 2 young black girls, citing trafficking concerns. Turns out their dad is a majority shareholder. He just initiated a ground stop of the entire tri-state fleet until they were on board. Craziest thing I've ever seen. The tweet was a spark dropped into a vat of digital gasoline. Within an hour, it had been retweeted thousands of times. At ground stop, Nashtan Global Air, and Brenda Walsh began trending. Wu's initial tweet was followed by a thread detailing the public humiliation, the crying children, and the gate agent's smug demeanor. He didn't have all the facts, but he had the optics, and the optics were damning. The narrative was irresistible. A story of David and Goliath, except Goliath was a racist gate agent, and David was 2 innocent children with a father who wielded the thunderbolts of corporate power. It was a morality play for the 21st century. By the time Flight 88 was over the Atlantic, the story had been picked up by major news outlets. The Daily Mail had a typically sensationalist headline, Gate Agent from Hell Karen, airline worker, humiliates black twins, 10, and flags them for trafficking. Until their CEO dad grounds, entire fleet in furious phone call. Photos of Brenda Walsh, scraped from her public Facebook profile, were plastered everywhere. There she was smiling at a family BBQ holding a small dog, posing with a "Live, Laugh, Love" sign in her kitchen. The internet detectives went to work, dissecting every aspect of her life. Her address was posted on fringe message boards. Her personal phone number was leaked. Her email inbox was flooded with a torrent of hate mail so vile it defied description. Global Air Alliance, caught completely flat-footed, went into full crisis mode. Their initial statement was a bland corporate apology that only fanned the flames. Official statement from Global Air Alliance. We are aware of an incident at Newark Liberty International Airport involving 2 young passengers and a staff member. We are conducting a full investigation into the matter. Global Air Alliance is committed to providing a safe and welcoming environment for all our customers. The public's response was derisive. "A welcoming environment. Your agent accused 2 kids of being trafficked," one user replied. "Fire Brenda Walsh," another demanded, a sentiment echoed in tens of thousands of posts. In London, Marcus Sterling had arranged for a car to meet his daughters directly on the tarmac, shielding them from any further public scrutiny. He had also dispatched his formidable PR team. They didn't deny the story, they shaped it. A source close to the Sterling family leaked a carefully worded statement to a sympathetic journalist at a prestigious newspaper. "Sterling is a fiercely private man," the source said, "but he is above all a father. He acted not as a shareholder, but as any parent would when faced with the blatant discrimination and public humiliation of their children. His focus right now is solely on the well-being of his daughters, who were deeply traumatized by this experience." The statement was masterful. It framed his unprecedented act of corporate warfare as a simple, righteous act of fatherly protection. He wasn't a bully who shut down an airline. He was a hero who stood up to a racist. The pressure on Global Air Alliance became immense. The stock price took a noticeable dip in pre-market trading. Sponsors threatened to pull their partnerships. The story was leading newscasts around the world. 24 hours after Flight 88 landed at Heathrow, the airline buckled. CEO Richard Davenport scheduled a press conference. Standing before a bank of cameras, his face grim, he announced that Brenda Walsh had been terminated, effective immediately. "Her actions," Davenport said, his voice heavy, "are not representative of the values of Global Air Alliance. They were a shocking and unacceptable breach of our protocols and our trust. We have extended our deepest apologies to the Sterling family. Furthermore, we will be implementing a company-wide mandatory racial bias and sensitivity retraining program for all 30,000 of our public-facing employees." The crowd-sourced verdict was in. The digital mob had claimed its scalp. Brenda Walsh was for all intents and purposes a pariah. Her career was over. Her reputation was in ashes. She had become a global symbol of petty tyranny and casual racism, a villain in a story that had captured the world's attention. The karma felt swift, righteous, and absolute. For the millions who had followed the story, it was a satisfying conclusion. The bully had been punished, the innocent vindicated, and a powerful message had been sent. But in the quiet, manicured suburbs of New Jersey, in a house now under siege from news vans and internet trolls, the truth was far more complicated and far more terrifying. The digital firestorm had delivered its verdict, but it had done so without a trial, and the full story had not yet been told. The world moved on. Christmas came, the news cycle churned, and the story of the grounded airline and the disgraced gate agent faded into the archive of internet outrage. For Maya and Mia, the rest of their vacation was a whirlwind of grandmotherly love. London sights and calls from their father, who joined them just after Christmas, his presence a comforting shield. The incident was a bad memory, smoothed over by time and affection. For Marcus Sterling, it was a problem solved, an injustice rectified with the decisive force he applied to all his business dealings. But for a local New Jersey journalist named Sarah Koenig, a fictional character, not the real-life journalist, something about the neat, perfect narrative felt off. Koenig wasn't a high-flying tech reporter or a national correspondent. She wrote for a small, respected local paper, the Essex County Ledger. Her beat was the mundane, the human stories that got lost in the national glare. And Brenda Walsh was one of her local people. Koenig had seen the hate, the doxing, the gleeful destruction of a woman's life. While the world saw a one-dimensional villain, Koenig saw a 58-year-old woman who had lived in the same modest house for 3 decades, who coached a local girls' softball team, and whose neighbors, when cautiously approached, described her as strict and a stickler for rules, but never as a racist. It didn't add up. Driven by a reporter's skepticism, Koenig started digging. She didn't have access to the airline's inner sanctum, but she had something else time and a knack for finding the people who were ignored in the rush for a headline. Her first break came from a surprising source, a retired Global Air Alliance pilot who had flown out of Newark for 20 years. He agreed to speak on the condition of anonymity. "Look," the pilot said, stirring his coffee in a quiet diner. "Brenda was a pain in the arse, no doubt. She followed the rule book like it was the Bible. If your bag was half a pound overweight, she'd make you check it. But the woman I knew wasn't a bigot. She was just rigid, terrified of making a mistake." He paused, leaning forward. "But there's something else you should know. The airline has been under massive pressure about human trafficking, specifically out of Newark." He explained that the Department of Homeland Security had identified a specific trafficking ring that was exploiting unaccompanied minor programs on transatlantic flights. They used forged or incomplete documentation, often relying on the sheer volume of holiday travelers to slip through the cracks. "They sent out a dozen memos," the pilot said. "Internal bulletins. We had mandatory training last month. The key red flag, they told us to look for a single guardian on the booking, especially on a last-minute international ticket with incomplete digital verification of the other parent's consent or a sole guardianship decree. They told us to be vigilant, to stop the flight if we had to. Brenda was just doing exactly what they'd hammered into our heads for weeks." This was the first thread, a policy that wasn't just corporate procedure, but a response to a specific active federal investigation. Koenig's next call was to a contact she had in the Port Authority Police Department. After some cajoling, the source confirmed it. There was an active multi-agency investigation targeting trafficking through Newark. They couldn't give details, but they confirmed that airline personnel had been instructed to be hyper-vigilant and to err on the side of caution. Now the story looked different. Brenda Walsh wasn't acting on a racist whim. She was following a directive, albeit clumsily, and without the delicate customer service skills required for such a sensitive situation. The final crucial piece of the puzzle came from a source deep inside Global Air Alliance's IT department, a disgruntled employee who had been laid off in the company's cost-cutting measures and had an axe to grind with the CEO, Richard Davenport. This source was the key. "The whole thing stinks," the source told Koenig over an encrypted call. "Sterling's story is built on a lie, his sole guardianship status. It wasn't properly documented in the system. That's why Brenda's computer flagged it. But Sterling said his lawyers helped draft the policy," Koenig countered, "and that his status was top tier. He's a shareholder, not a king," the source scoffed. His profile has a million perks, sure. But the legal documents section, it's not magic. Someone has to scan and upload the notarized court orders. His assistant was supposed to do it. We checked the logs. The file for his sole guardianship decree was uploaded the morning of the flight, after the girls had already checked in. It hadn't been processed or verified by the legal department yet. When Brenda checked, all the system showed was an unverified, recently uploaded document. According to the new DHS directive, that was a massive red flag. Koenig felt a chill run down her spine. The perfect story was shattering. Brenda Walsh hadn't ignored a verified status. She had flagged an unverified one, just as she had been trained to do. The fault didn't lie with her, but with the tardy paperwork of a billionaire's assistant. The source continued, and here's the kicker. The signature of the mother, the one Brenda flagged as unverified, it was on an old, outdated form in their file from years ago, before the divorce, before he got sole custody. The system, in its infinite wisdom, cross-referenced the new unverified sole guardianship upload with the old two-parent consent form and spit out an error. A big one. Brenda didn't invent the problem. The computer system, combined with Sterling's own sloppy administrative work, handed it to her. The final piece slotted into place. Brenda Walsh, in her rigid by-the-book way, had stumbled upon a genuine system-generated security alert. Her fatal error wasn't malice, but a complete lack of tact. She hadn't softly explained the discrepancy. She had publicly and clumsily announced it, adding her own misguided and offensive commentary about trafficking turning a procedural snag into a public shaming. She had provided the perfect optics for a story of racial discrimination. Marcus Sterling, confronted with a problem of his own, making his assistant's failure to update crucial documents in a timely manner, hadn't seen a bureaucratic mix-up. He saw an insult, and instead of admitting his own logistical failure, he had reached for the most powerful weapon. He had the narrative of racism and his immense corporate power. He had chosen to be a victim and a hero rather than a father who had forgotten to file his paperwork correctly. Koenig now held a truth that was the polar opposite of the one that had convicted Brenda Walsh in the court of public opinion. The story wasn't about a racist gate agent. It was about a flawed system, a billionaire's pride, and a woman who had been sacrificed to cover up a simple, embarrassing administrative error. She had the story, and publishing it would be like lighting the original fire all over again, only this time the flames would be aimed in a very different direction. Sarah Koenig's article, published on a quiet Tuesday morning, landed with the force of a tectonic shift. The headline was unassuming, a stark contrast to the sensationalism of the initial coverage. An agent's ruin, a father's rage, and a missing document, the other side of the global air-ground stop. The piece was meticulously researched, a calm, fact-based deconstruction of the viral narrative. It laid out the timeline with cold precision. The active DHS anti-trafficking initiative, the specific internal memos sent to global air staff, the system-generated flag on the Sterling booking, and the bombshell revelation. The log files showing Marcus Sterling's sole guardianship documents were uploaded just hours before the flight and were not yet verified when Brenda Walsh checked the system. Koenig didn't absolve Brenda of her poor handling of the situation. She quoted a customer service expert who noted that procedure should never supplant compassion, and that Walsh's public pronouncements were a catastrophic failure of tact. But the core of the article was undeniable. The incident was triggered not by malice, but by a procedural red flag created by the Sterling camp itself. The reaction was a slow burn, then a raging inferno. The first to feel the heat was Global Air Alliance and its CEO Richard Davenport. He had fired Brenda Walsh, to appease a powerful shareholder and quell a PR nightmare. Now he was exposed. He had terminated an employee who was, in essence, following a direct security-related mandate. Lawsuits from the pilots' union were threatened. An internal revolt began to brew among employees who felt that one of their own had been thrown to the wolves to protect the airline's relationship with a wealthy investor. The digital mob, which had so eagerly condemned Brenda Walsh, now felt a sickening sense of whiplash. The self-righteous anger turned to confusion, then to a new, more complicated fury. The comments sections on the news articles reporting Koenig's story became a war zone. "So you're telling me we destroyed a woman's life because a billionaire's assistant forgot to file some paperwork?" One top comment read, "Wait, so the hero dad grounded an entire airline, costing millions and disrupting thousands of lives to cover up his own mistake." Another posted. The focus shifted entirely, zeroing in on Marcus Sterling. The narrative of the protective father crumbled, replaced by the image of an arrogant, untouchable billionaire who had deployed a nuclear option to avoid a minor personal embarrassment. His use of the racism card now looked cynical and manipulative, a way to deflect from his own culpability. The hard karma the user had requested wasn't a simple reversal of fortune. It was something far more insidious. For Brenda Walsh, the initial wave of hatred had been hot and fast. For Marcus Sterling, the backlash was a cold, creeping poison. His business was built on a reputation for ruthless but meticulous genius. The story of the ground stop had initially added to his legend, a man you don't cross. But Koenig's article reframed it as recklessness and deceit. It suggested that his judgment, his most valuable asset, was flawed and driven by ego. Whispers started in the financial world. If Sterling could cause this much chaos over a personal slight, was he really a stable partner for multi-billion-dollar deals? His carefully constructed image of infallible competence began to crack. The most brutal karma, however, was personal. The story now had a new layer of complexity that was impossible to shield his daughters from. At 10 years old, they were now old enough to use the internet themselves. They had seen the first stories where their father was a hero. Now they saw the new ones. One evening, Maya came to him, her tablet in hand. On the screen was an article with a picture of her and Mia next to one of Brenda Walsh under the headline, "The Lie That Grounded an Airline." "Daddy," she asked, her voice small and confused, it says it was our fault, that our papers were wrong. Is that true?" Marcus Sterling looked at his daughter's face, a face he had sought to protect, and saw a new kind of hurt in her eyes. It wasn't the sting of a stranger's insult. It was the dawning, painful confusion of a child, realizing their parent might not be the perfect hero they believed him to be. The public humiliation he had sought to avenge had circled back, transformed into a private shame that now tainted his relationship with his own children. He had won the battle at Gate B-47, but in the war for his daughter's simple, untroubled belief in him, he was beginning to suffer devastating losses. Brenda Walsh, meanwhile, was cautiously emerging from her self-imposed exile. Her lawyer, armed with Koenig's article, filed a massive wrongful termination and defamation lawsuit against Global Air Alliance. A GoFundMe, started by her former softball team to help with her legal fees, exploded with donations from people who now saw her as the ultimate victim. She was no longer airline Karen. She was the woman who stood up to a billionaire's lie and lost everything only to be vindicated by the truth. The story had become a real-life drama about the nature of power, the rush to judgment, and the devastating recoil of a lie. Marcus Sterling had used his immense power to create a narrative that suited him to inflict a swift and brutal punishment. But the truth once unearthed had a power all its own. And its form of karma was not swift or simple. It was slow, corrosive, and it was aimed not at his wallet or his business, but at the very thing he claimed to be protecting the integrity of his family and his own name. The fallout from Koenig's article was not a single event, but a slow, grinding process of consequence. It was a reckoning that played out not in a dramatic 24-hour news cycle, but over months in courtrooms, boardrooms, and within the quiet, opulent walls of Marcus Sterling's home. The first to fall was Richard Davenport. The CEO of Global Air Alliance found himself in an untenable position. He was besieged by the pilots' union, facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit from Brenda Walsh that his own legal team advised him they would almost certainly lose, and criticized by his board for his handling of the entire affair. His panicked decision to placate Sterling had backfired spectacularly, exposing the airline to massive liability and ridicule. 6 months after the ground stop, Global Air Alliance announced Davenport's early retirement. His departure was a quiet admission of guilt, a corporate sacrifice to cauterize the wound. Brenda Walsh's lawsuit was settled out of court for a sum that was rumored to be in the 8 figures. The terms were sealed, but part of the agreement leaked by an insider was a public apology from the airline. It was read by the new CEO at a press conference, a stilted lawyer-vetted statement that acknowledged that Miss Walsh had been acting in accordance with enhanced security protocols, and that her termination had been a regrettable error in judgment made under extraordinary circumstances. Brenda herself never returned to the airline industry. The settlement gave her financial security, but the ordeal had broken her spirit for the job. She retreated from the public eye, refusing all interviews. The victory was legal, not personal. The world had branded her, and while the brand had changed from villain to victim, it was a brand nonetheless. She had won her case, but lost her anonymity forever. The true reckoning, however, was for Marcus Sterling. The story of his deception became a persistent, toxic footnote to his name. Competitors in the cutthroat world of finance began to use it against him, whispering about his temperament and unpredictability. A major acquisition he had been orchestrating for months fell through at the last minute. The official reason was financial. But the scuttlebutt on Wall Street was that the other company's board got cold feet about partnering with a man known for such personal volatility. His power, once absolute, now had an asterisk next to it. But the most profound consequences were the ones that unfolded away from the public gaze. The conversation with his daughter Maya had been a turning point. The simple binary of good and evil, of protector and aggressor, had collapsed. He was forced to explain the concept of nuance, of blame, of mistakes to his children in a way that implicated him directly. Yes. He had finally told Maya that evening, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. There was a mistake with our paperwork. The lady at the gate saw that mistake. But the way she treated you, the things she said, that was wrong. And I reacted. You made the plane stop, Maya had said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact, trying to connect the dots. Yes, I did. He tried to explain his rage, the protective instinct that had overwhelmed all other rational thought. But how do you explain to a child that your ego was so wounded, your pride so pricked by a public challenge to your authority, that you unleashed a global disruption to avoid admitting a simple clerical error? How do you explain that you allowed a narrative of racism to flourish because it was more convenient than the truth of your own disorganization? He couldn't. Not really. The result was a subtle but palpable shift in his home. The adoring, unequivocal faith his daughters had placed in him was now tinged with a new questioning awareness. They still loved him, but the pedestal had crumbled. They had seen the man behind the curtain, a man who was powerful and protective, but also fallible and proud. The final karmic twist came nearly a year after the incident. Marcus was attending a charity gala in New York, an event crawling with the city's elite. He was standing with a group of fellow titans of industry when a man he vaguely recognized, another private equity manager, approached him. "Marcus," the man said a little too loudly, "I have to tell you my wife just flew Global Air last week. Had an issue with her ticket. The gate agent, bless her heart, couldn't have been nicer. Pulled her aside, spoke to her, privately sorted the whole thing out in 5 minutes. Seems they really took your lesson to heart." The man smiled, but his eyes were mocking. The other men in the circle chuckled. The story had become a punchline in their world, a cautionary tale about a man who used a sledgehammer to crack a nut and ended up breaking his own hand. Marcus Sterling felt a familiar surge of hot anger. His first instinct was to lash out, to cut the man down with a sharp, brutal remark. But then he thought of Maya's questioning eyes. He thought of the global chaos he had unleashed. He thought of Brenda Walsh, a woman whose life he had ruined to soothe his own pride. For the first time, the anger was followed by a wave of something else, a profound, weary shame. He simply nodded. "I'm glad to hear it," he said, his voice quiet. He then excused himself and walked away from the group, leaving their knowing smirks and quiet laughter behind him. He had grounded an airline. He had vanquished his perceived enemy. He had asserted his power in the most dramatic way imaginable. But in the end, he was the one who felt grounded, tethered to a mistake that had cost him something far more valuable than money or stock prices. He had lost a piece of his own integrity and a piece of his children's innocence. And that he was coming to realize was a debt that no amount of power or wealth could ever repay. The story of the Sterling twins isn't just a drama about a grounded airline. It's a mirror reflecting our modern world. It shows how quickly a single story, fueled by social media, can create heroes and villains, and how easily that narrative can be built on a foundation of lies. We saw the satisfying thrill of a bully getting her due, but then the sickening twist of realizing the hero may have been the biggest manipulator of all. This tale is a powerful reminder to question what we see online, to look for the full story before we join the chorus of outrage. It forces us to ask what is true justice and what happens when the very people we cheer for are the ones who are deceiving us the most. If this story made you think, if it made you feel that jolt of shock and surprise, then please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel. We uncover the hidden side of the stories you think you know, and you won't want to miss what we expose next.